So continuing, we're going to start with Professor Figueredo De Pérez regarding the spread of pathogens and other biological risks, threats to international peace and security.
Hello, good afternoon. First of all, I want to thank our dear colleague in Peru for reminding us about the use of time. I will do my best in keeping this presentation very short, so you can have the opportunity to listen to the rest of my colleagues, and also pose your questions to the presenters. Well, as many of you know, COVID-19 presented very different challenges to international law, international relations, human rights, and it is in this context that this presentation takes place. So the aim of this presentation is to work on some thoughts around the idea of the spread of pathogens as a threat to international peace and security. And therefore, I would like to start by thinking about the question of what constitutes a threat to international peace and security. As many of you know, Article 1 of the United Nations Charter points out that one of the the first purpose of the United Nations is to maintain international peace and security. And to that end, Article 39 of the Charter points out that the Security Council shall determine the existence of any threat to the peace or breach of the peace or an act of aggression, and shall make recommendations or decide what measures shall be taken in accordance with Articles 41 and 42 to maintain or restore international peace and security. In this sense, international legal academia has addressed the question of what constitutes an international threat, a threat to international peace and security. For example, Professor Malcolm Shaw from the United Kingdom has been consistent in pointing out that there are uncertainties related to what constitutes a threat to international peace and security. One of the answers that he posits to this question is that in the end, it depends upon the relationship between the permanent 5 members of the Council, but also in the way they assess every situation, not only regarding their own political interests, but also regarding the case-by-case assessment. It's not only that any negative vote by the permanent 5 can hinder any furtherance of decision being taken to establish something as an international threat to peace, as a threat to international peace and security, but also that there are no consistent elements. In a first moment, I wanted to show some precedents of what has been determined to constitute a threat to international peace and security. So the first instance where the Security Council, and in this I'm following Professor Shaw's assessment, decided that there was a threat to international peace and security was the conflict in the former mandated territory of Palestine, where neighboring Arab countries had entered into hostilities with the new state of Israel. Then in 1966, Resolution 2221 pointed out how the situation of the minority white regime in Rhodesia constituted a threat to international peace and security. And further on, in 1991, Resolution 713 of the Council determined that the situation in former Yugoslavia constituted a threat to international peace and security, thus giving birth to the ad hoc international tribunal. In the same vein, in 1994, Resolution 955 points out at the genocide in Rwanda as a threat to international peace and security. And one of the things that the previous resolutions have in common is that there is an explicit state of war. Now, in 2001, resolutions 1368 and 1373 characterized the attacks on the World Trade Center as a threat to international peace and security, and the concept of war on terror thus is born. And here we have a different scenario where we don't have certainty of I mean, there is no, the resolutions are not targeted to a specific situation with fully identified actors. It is addressed to terror as an abstract concept, and even though Al-Qaeda was part of the target of the resolutions, a new concept is introduced into the international law of peace and security. Then in 2004, Resolution 1540 outlines the proliferation of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons as a threat to international peace and security. And if you see these precedents mentioned till this point, they have three things in common. There's a will, where actors willingly decide to resort to the threat or the use of force. There's a material element, where actors materialize their intention to use force or to threat with the use of force. And in every case, there has been a determination by the Security Council in order to act. This structure is very helpful to understand how the Security Council has addressed those conflicts where there are factual elements where you can point out to a conflictual situation in which you can identify proper actors and there are hostilities being conducted, and thus it is relatively easy to determine that there is a threat to international peace and security. But then the question in this presentation should be, can a pandemic pose a threat to international peace and security? Well, the Security Council has addressed this point in Resolution 1983 in 2012, when they addressed the situation with HIV/AIDS, and then in two other instances in 2014 and 2018, resolutions 2177 and 2439 address the situation with Ebola. Now, the common ground between this, amongst these solutions, is the fact that they had to deal with certain conditionals. For example, in Resolution 1983, the Security Council determined that HIV/AIDS constituted a threat to international peace and security, so far as it might challenge activities of peacekeeping and activities regarding the conduction of hostilities, and also the focus of resolutions 2177 and 2439 deals with the operations of peacekeeping in Africa, where an Ebola pandemic was ongoing. But then in 2020, Resolution 2532 took the unprecedented challenge for the Security Council to address whether or not COVID-19 as a pandemic was likely to endanger the maintenance of international peace and security. In this sense, the Security Council made an invitation for all ongoing conflicts to stop. but many of them, and one notable example is Colombia, didn't stop after the invitation of the Security Council. And there were other challenges that the international community faced regarding this pandemic that weren't addressed by the Security Council. So then a further question should be, should the Security Council handle the pandemic or a pandemic? And in this sense, we would have to go through different scenarios. Let me be very, very concise. Within the very different theories regarding the origins of COVID, at least of this 5 that I'm showing you here, 4 of them have nothing to do with the will to produce a pandemic or to spread a pathogen in the world. But recently there has been discussion. There have been discussions regarding the intentional or unintentional leak at a laboratory in Wuhan. That should determine whether or not this should be addressed by the Security Council in very simple terms. The approach that international law has taken so far is that the Security Council shouldn't meddle in these situations as far as there's no actual intention of attacking a foreign state or a group of people or endanger their existence. But there's an intentionality element here. Now, the Security Council hasn't been able to deal with other challenges that a pandemic poses. For example, there have been no responses from the Security Council regarding the use of intellectual property in the production of vaccines. There has been no statement from the Security Council regarding the very complicated human rights violations that arose as a consequence of the health and sanitary measures that were instituted by local governments and national governments in the handling of the pandemic. And this is basically because what has been happening so far is that the international community hasn't been very welcoming of an approach where pandemic is addressed in security terms. And that is why basically the whole responsibility of dealing with the pandemic was laid upon the World Health Organization. Now, given the fact that the international community has been reticent to addressing this in security terms, there is a new institution, not an institution, there's a new treaty being negotiated amongst the members of the World Health Organization. This has been a thing for a while now, and in March 2023, the negotiating body in the World Health Organization started negotiating a pandemic preparedness response treaty. This shows a will of the international community to keep the subject of pandemics away from a security perspective. And in this vein, the treaty is trying to address things that I just mentioned. For example, the allocation of resources to produce vaccines or to deal effectively with treatment to the spread of pathogens. But as recent precedent has shown us, there's little will, there's a lack of will to address these issues. In this sense, if you remember, the WTO, the World Trade Organization, had the opportunity to produce a waiver of the TRIPS agreement in order to facilitate the access of technologies the access to technologies by the global South countries that were able to produce vaccines. But as you probably are already aware of, these negotiations, which started in 2020, ended last year with very disappointing results. So as a summary of this presentation, and I'm sorry if I went too fast on this, but I will be willing to answer any questions in the questions space session. In the current approaches, the Security Council could only be able to intervene to deal with a pandemic as far as it poses a threat to the conduction of peacekeeping operations, or, for example, the well-being of certain individuals, as far as it is a product of an intentional attack. But there is a resistance to deal with this subject from a security perspective, and that is why this has been delegated into the World Health Organization. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope I was brief enough.
Thank you very much, Professor.